and welcome to another installment of Anti-Capitalist Readings from Scripture. I've got a few for you today, short passages. The first is Proverbs 22, verse 7. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower becomes the lender's slave. Exodus 22:25. If you lend money to my people, to the poor among you, you are not to act as a creditor to him. You shall not charge him interest. And Romans 13:8. Owe nothing to anyone except to love one another, for he who loves his neighbor has fulfilled the law. So we're talking about debt today. These passages were really interesting for a number of reasons. I'll cover a couple of points on each. In Proverbs 22:7, the rich rules over the poor. I think that should be self-evident, just looking around. The borrower becomes the lender's slave. And I think a lot of times we don't think of it in those terms. We think of it in terms of the bank or the credit card or the wealthy benefactor is doing us a solid and really helping us out of a jam or helping to promote our dreams. And we don't consider that when we owe a monetary debt, that monetary debt can be used to extract other things from us in service of that debt. Banks can tell you how to run your business, or they won't give you a line of credit, for example. And we need to think about that in those terms. In Exodus 22:25, the explicit instruction not to treat your fellow citizens as not to be a creditor to them, not to charge interest. Now, understand the context of that passage. That is out of the law of Moses, and Christians are not obligated to obey the law of Moses. However, we need to understand that the trajectory from Old to New Covenant, or scripturally speaking, Old to New Testament, has always been towards a greater degree of righteousness, and we sometimes don't see that mapped out very clearly, but in this instance we do. In the Old Testament, you had loans, you had different forms of mandated welfare, but in the New Testament, in the primitive church, we see radical generosity and a sense of neighborly obligation to make sure that everybody in the community is taken care of. So the prescription against charging interest in the law of Moses is something that needs to be explicitly said, whereas in the primitive church it's not something that would even be considered, because everyone's needs are being taken care of, and it doesn't even occur to anybody to expect the repayment of a debt, let alone to charge interest on it. And then Romans 13:8. What's really interesting about that is, first of all, the latter half of it, the first half of it, owe nothing to anyone except to love one another, which suggests that we actually owe love to others. Now, if you are a Christian, if you do believe that Christ has the authority and you do give him the primacy in your life to tell him what to do with your life, then you also know that he does command us to love others as we love ourselves, to love our enemies. And that is something we do owe, and we do need to be reminded of that. I know that I certainly do. But it does also say, owe nothing. The context of that verse now is referring to authorities, like don't withhold from those in authority the things that you owe them, such as the customary dues, taxes, and so on and so forth. But then the overall theme is owe nothing. Now, um, owing something again makes you a slave to that person. And what Christ wants us to have is freedom. So, um, being in debt, being especially weighed down and enslaved by debt, is the opposite of freedom. Scripture says that it was for freedom that Christ set us free. That all things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. We are supposed to be free from such obligations. However, in the society in which we live, that is impossible. And it's not an individual choice that I get to make. I have no choice but to go into debt. I'm not given an option. If I want a car, I must go into debt to get a car. Now, I suppose I could spend a few years saving up, but that gets unreasonable with medical expenses and other things that come along the way. If I want to hold down a job and have reliable transportation, in most areas where I would live, public transportation is not an option. Taking a cab would be more expensive than actually maintaining a car. So then I need a car to have reliable, affordable transportation, but in order to get one, I would need to finance it in some way. That's going into debt. If I want a house, now, like, who buys a house outright? Like, who does that? That's almost completely unheard of, except for those who are obscenely rich. And people say, "Oh, well, I bought my house and I own this," but it's like, do you really own it? You're paying a mortgage to the bank, and if you don't pay it, your house gets taken away. So you are obligated. You are enslaved to that bank. So let's say I want to be able to afford to do all of these things, and I want to get a great job, and I want to propel myself into a career and with some form of expertise. How do I do that? Well, I need to get schooling. Well, I can't pay for schooling with a part-time or full-time job. I need to go into debt to get that schooling. I need to take out loans to get that schooling. Because the likelihood of me getting a full ride scholarship is pretty slim, even if I'm already an expert in that field. So, and the other thing is, if I, like, living situations, a lot of places you can't even live there, you can't even rent there, if they don't like your credit score. And your credit score only goes up the more you go into debt. And what I mean by that is, let's say that you purchase something with a credit card, and then after a month or two, pay the entire thing off in one giant lump sum. Your credit score actually goes down, and I'm speaking from experience on this one. You think you're doing the responsible thing by paying it off, but actually your credit score goes down when you pay it off all at once, because they don't want to see that you can pay it off. They want to see that you can keep making payments. They want you to stay in debt. And if you continue to stay in debt while making continuous payments, then your credit score goes up. Then you're able to take out loans. Then you're able to get into the apartments you really want. Then you're able to function better in society. Everything is geared towards you staying in debt. The system is designed to keep you a slave. And that is the result of the monopoly of banks. Banks run everything. You can't do anything without a line of credit. You can't get a line of credit without a bank. And that is where we are in this capitalist system. That is how it's designed. That's how it functions. So I'm not individually morally culpable to that, because I don't have the choice not to participate in this system. I need to survive. I need to make sure I can get my needs taken care of. However, I also need to acknowledge that the system itself is designed to function in a way that God has explicitly said not to live. So if I am to endorse that system, then I am advocating for disobedience to God, and I am advocating against the things of God. So we need to acknowledge that the system as it is designed, the system as it currently functions, forces us to live in a manner that is antithetical to the things of Christ. And in this way, as much as any other, capitalism is antithetical to the Christian way of life. Anyway, that's it for today's installment of Anti-Capitalist Readings from Scriptures. See you next time.